Let's see here. How do I get... Why am I having so much trouble with my chat box today? I just want to pop out my chat box. Maybe this will do it. Hey, how's it going, Srigsers? Not sure if I pronounced that right. Welcome, welcome. How are you doing today? Is your school open? Man, I'm really having trouble with this chat box. I wonder... Twitch changed everything. It was open, but now it's closed for the next 2 weeks. Got you. Yeah. I mean, I think it's wise for schools to close for 2 weeks. I think it's very likely that most of them end up closing for closer to 2 or 3 months. But we'll see. It depends partially on how we set policy at the national level. But I would be pretty surprised if a majority of U.S. schools are open after 2 weeks. Also, feel free to post wherever you'd like to spread the word about this. I'm trying to eventually get to the point where we're doing this almost every school day. The idea is eventually to have this serve as essentially your place to get extra enrichment tutoring essentially for your subjects while you're at home doing video learning, because no one really likes video learning. Or I guess that's not fair. Some people like video learning, but the goal for this is to be a completely free resource for people. Yeah, just to provide a service for folks that that need a little extra help. Do you think that even with these policies put into place by schools, students won't get sick during this period? Well, if you think about what students do, most of what they do is go to school and go to club events and go to sporting events for school. So yeah, I do think that closing schools is going to help drop the transmission rate. These are some of these things we're going to talk about a bit later. Let's see. Also, let me post in the... Man, I'm still having trouble with my chat room. Oh, that's where they moved the pop-out button. All right, there we go. That's better. That is better. So let me put that there. Let's put the chat box here. Put Discord here. I'm going to post in the AP Bio room as well. Doing a stream here. Twitch teaches biology. Oh, I can't ping, can I? Oh well. But yeah, so for this particular lesson, I guess we're going to call these lessons or streams. The goal is to cover this at roughly about an AP biology level. So I'm gonna review basic concepts, but not too much. Hopefully, not to a point where people are starting to get bored of it. But I'm also going to try to make sure that really critical concepts to understand, I will review to make sure that people understand them, because different classes go through this stuff at different rates. Oh wait, whoops. Let me edit that link. Also, where did my general chat go? General. Posting one more time, in case someone missed the last one. And then we're going to get started shortly. Oh, I gotta mention. Interesting. So Actually, in some way, I'm going to someone says in the AP Bio chat, explain why antibiotics are rather unrelated to viruses, because you've been hearing so many people talking about antibiotics like they are effective for this. In some cases, they are effective. We will talk about all this on the stream. Though it's a little subtle. It's not quite effective against the virus, more effective against secondary infections that the virus facilitates. How long is the stream going to be? Good question. Depends on how much interest there is. Depends on how many people are hanging out. I'm happy to, basically talk and answer questions for as long as people are interested in hearing it. I guess with a hard cutoff of probably around maybe midnight, but we'll see. Back when I streamed a lot of Magic the Gathering, I would do some pretty long, like 8 or 12-hour streams. So I'm no stranger to talking for a very long time. Anyways, okay. So I guess we can get started. So I guess I wanted to post this picture first. This is the really cool picture that a lot of people have been seeing on news sites. This is the computer simulation that CDC posted. Essentially, what you can see here, the red are what are called spike proteins. And this is the probably the most important single protein and the most important single component of the virus for us to understand, because this is the most accessible protein that antibodies can bind to on the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So if you take a look at this spike protein, basically it's embedded inside I guess it would be called a capsid. It's embedded inside the capsid of the virus, and what it does is it binds to a receptor called the ACE2 receptor. I'll type that in chat for folks. And the ACE2 receptor is also called the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. Basically, it binds to an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. You don't need to really know what that does. But we are trying to attack this at about a AP Bio level. Rasa, I'm not sure what that means. But yeah, so it binds to and I think on the next slide I've got, yes. So that's what that spike protein does, is it binds to the critical receptor, and that's the primary way that it gets access to cells. The other components of SARS-CoV, what do they call it? SARS-CoV-2. I'm just going to call it COVID because COVID's easier. Incidentally, the reason why I'm tripping over all this is COVID-19 is the name for the syndrome or the set of symptoms caused by the SARS virus, and the virus's name is SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-2. Imagine taking AP Bio without Griddens. Yeah, I guess. I don't know what you're trying to say. Anyways, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Yeah, so the ACE2 receptor is important for, among other things, regulating blood pressure, which we'll get to in a bit. That's actually pretty important down the line. Like all viruses, we have this protein coat, and then we also have, in this case, an RNA coil in the center. And so this RNA contains all the genes of the virus, which then, once the virus gains access to the cells, it starts replicating. Hooray, hooray. I guess I don't know, this is a pretty cool little diagram here. There's these other proteins here. I'm not even sure what the M proteins do. And yeah, there's some E proteins. Actually, this hemagglutinin esterase dimer is a pretty important protein. And because based on its action, basically this is one of the proteins that helps the virus pass through membranes. And there's a drug in trials currently that is trying to attempt to basically prevent this particular enzyme from doing its job. So that's kind of cool, but also beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. Anyways, yeah, this is a pretty useful diagram. Do viruses have phospholipid bilayers? No, viruses do not have phospholipid bilayers. Viruses are typically composed of proteins and some sort of nucleic acid. sometimes those proteins can have glycoprotein components as well, so they can have sugar components to the protein. But primarily, viruses are just protein and nucleic acid. If it has a lipid bilayer, it's probably it's probably a cell, and that probably means that it's either a bacteria or a eukaryote of some sort. I guess I shouldn't shortchange the archaeans either, but that's not what we're talking about today. Anyhow, so this is a really cool diagram. Um, as you can see, like I said, the ACE2 receptor over here binds to SARS-CoV-2, and basically what it does is it causes the cell to endocytose the virus. Endocytosis, endo meaning inside, cytosis. I'm actually not sure what cytosis means, but endocytosis means it's bringing it into the cell. Let's see, I guess cyto means cell, so into cell, yeah, I guess it makes sense. So endocytosis means it's bringing the virus into the cell. Exocytosis would be the opposite if it's putting something out of the cell. We're going to get to that in step 6. That is exocytosis right there. Now, once it's in the cell, the virus has to get outside of that vesicle, which it manages, and then once it does, it releases that RNA. And some of that RNA is directly translated into proteins by the cell. And so, that's pretty typical of viruses. They use the cell's own ribosomes in order to translate the viral RNA. Reminds you of clathrin-dependent endocytosis. Yep, that's cool stuff. It's been a long time since I studied that, but yes, I vaguely remember it from college. Clathrins, I remember thinking are pretty cool. Microbiology isn't actually the area that I have the most experience in, as I studied evolutionary biology and ecology a lot closer in college. But I still remember enough to teach this. Anyhow, so then with the RNA, some of the RNA also ends up, some of those proteins end up forming a replication complex, which synthesizes the rest of the genes encoded in the RNA. So I find this really interesting. I don't actually understand the significance of this. Where the RNA, some of the RNA is synthesized into proteins by the cell, but then once those proteins are synthesized, those are the proteins that go on to synthesize the rest of the virus, which I think is pretty cool. So it's like two different sets of translation complexes are synthesizing the virus, which I think is neat. I don't really fully understand like how all that is. It's just kind of cool. Anyhow, one thing that ends up happening is these proteins and the RNA assemble in the Golgi. For those that might not remember or don't know, the Golgi is essentially the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi body, is essentially the system of it's a membrane-bound organelle that takes your proteins that are destined for secretion, or destined to end up in a membrane-bound organelle, and basically takes those proteins and turns them into, tags them and sends them to where they need to go. So, I mean, it makes sense that this happens in the Golgi, right? Because that's what the Golgi's job is. Its job is to package proteins and send them places. And unfortunately for us, our Golgi says, oh, cool, viral particles, let's make these into a virus, because it doesn't know any better. Then, yeah, so the Golgi is responsible for actually producing the virus. And then once that virus is produced, it is exocytosed. Pretty cool stuff. Viruses are neat. There are many different types of viruses. In this case, this is an RNA virus. Some viruses are DNA viruses. Some are retroviruses, where they're RNA viruses, but they use an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, and then the RNA basically gets transcribed into your genome backwards, so it goes from RNA to DNA. So Twitch frigid, I do not believe that it's converted into nuclear DNA because it's RNA. The viral nucleic acid is RNA, and I don't believe that it is a retrovirus. Retroviruses are RNA viruses that go from RNA to DNA, and they're actually cool for a lot of reasons. And one of which is that a significant portion of our genome is actually viral in origin. And basically what happened is long ago, yes, transposons, that's right. I think transposons. Is that right? Yeah, that sounds right. It's been a while. But a long time ago, what ended up happening is a retrovirus got its turned its RNA into DNA, got its DNA integrated into our genome, and then some mutation might have broken like the active site for the critical, or sorry, the initiation site for transcription for some critical protein, and so the virus was never able to actually escape from our genome. So there are hundreds or even thousands of segments of our DNA that are basically like viral graffiti, is one way to think about it, that has just become part of our DNA over time, which is pretty cool. And you can actually use that to track evolutionary relationships, which is neat. Anyhow, moving on. So here's a really cool picture. Oh, I didn't source this, but I saw it on the NPR website, and I'm not exactly sure where they got it. I don't think NPR took this picture. But this is a pretty cool picture. I believe these are lung cells, and the viral particles have been colored pink. This is artificially colored. I don't think they were using a tracer or anything for this. So they just went in and after the image was taken and colored them in. But pretty cool. You could see all these viruses just kind of chilling in the cell. Not a very happy cell. Um, and yeah, so that's also important to keep in mind. Viruses are much smaller than eukaryotic cells. They're much smaller even than bacterial cells. So, okay, so probably I kind of wanted to, is this diagram of how SARS-CoV-2 functions similar to how influenza does? It is quite similar, though there are some key differences. And the most important difference between SARS-CoV-2 and influenza, at least to my mind, is what protein it binds to. I forget actually what influenza binds to, but it doesn't bind to ACE2. And that makes a difference because and it's actually relevant here. The reason why COVID-19 does such a terribly efficient job at killing us is that it binds to receptors that are expressed very deep in the lungs. Well, in the lungs generally, but it tends to flourish best in the lower lobes of the lungs. And so since those receptors are present in these cells, it causes lots of damage to those cells and damage to the blood vessels, and this leads to fluid accumulating in the cells or in the alveoli. And these alveoli, if you don't remember, these are the air-filled sacs that allow for gas exchange between capillaries and the air. So if your alveoli are filling up, it makes gas exchange incredibly inefficient, and that's not so great. So this is what pneumonia is. It's when fluid starts filling up the little pockets in your lungs. And there are two different main types of pneumonia. There's both viral pneumonia and bacterial pneumonia. Is that fluid like excess surfactant? I don't believe so. My understanding of it is that it's a combination of cell goop, cells that have died and then have basically let their cell contents escape into the extracellular space. That some of it's a whole bunch of pus and white blood cells in there, viral particles. It's just a soup of nastiness, more or less. Also, eventually, blood plasma also ends up in the lungs as well. So bunch of bad things. What was I talking about? Right. So there's viral pneumonia and bacterial pneumonia. I don't really understand. Like I'm not a physician, so I don't know the practical difference in how they express. But one characteristic of COVID-19 is that it causes viral pneumonia, but then that viral pneumonia allows bacteria to flourish. So it kind of becomes a combined viral and bacterial pneumonia kind of situation. And that is one of the two avenues through which the majority of patients are dying from this. There's two main ways. One is that the pneumonia gets going. Actually, I think I have it on the next slide. Yeah, so the pneumonia gets going. The ability of the body to do gas exchange is greatly impaired. Once the body is having more trouble, and also bacteria jump in on the action. So eventually the lungs are unable to really fully provide enough oxygen to the body. And then in a process called decompensation, basically organs start to fail. because the tissues are not getting enough oxygen. This is both because you're right, and so that's because the lungs are unable to provide enough oxygen to the blood. In addition to that, then the bacteria, if they escape into the lungs or into the bloodstream, can cause sepsis, which can lead to septic shock and basically inflammation throughout the body, blood vessels leaking fluid. It's just a mess. And once someone gets into sepsis, that can be a game over. Um, Unfortunately. So, this is why someone earlier was saying, explain why antibiotics are rather unrelated to viruses, because they've been hearing so many people talking about antibiotics like they are effective. Well, actually, they are effective. They are effective at preventing or hopefully reducing the effect of sepsis and preventing the bacteria from really getting established. Um, Unfortunately, antibiotics also have some other side effects, so there's some problems with them, but yeah, they are actually a very important component of our medical response to this. Is it possible for some sort of inhibitor to block the site where SARS-CoV-2 binds while also stopping those cells from losing functionality? Possibly to prevent it from binding and replicating to stop the virus from progressing? That's a very, very good question. And I will get to that in a bit. There are some drugs that are related in some ways, though maybe not how you'd expect. So yeah, I will get to that. Hey, thanks for the follow, Twitch, Frigid. Let's see, what would antibiotics directly interact with viruses? No, antibiotics do not directly interact with viruses. So in the sense that antibiotics do, like, when people say, oh, I have a cold, give me antibiotics. Well, I mean, obviously, that's not going to help you if you have a cold. Colds are viral, and antibiotics don't help you with the viral infection. But if you have a very, very severe viral infection that causes viral pneumonia, then viral pneumonia can often lead to secondary bacterial infections, and antibiotics are a very, very important part of how we respond to those. So the answer to your question is no. Antibiotics do not directly interact with viruses. Okay, the other mechanism by which this virus is killing people, and this actually has a very, very personal, you know, how should I say it? This is very personal to me because my father died this way. This virus can cause acute viral cardiomyopathy. Sorry, I had to get the words right. There's cardiomyopathy and myocarditis, and I had to make sure I had the right one. So let's basically what the virus can do is if the virus gets into the bloodstream and it starts infecting heart tissue, which it can, because heart tissue also expresses very high amounts of the ACE2 receptor. So if the virus gets to the heart and it starts infecting heart tissue, that can damage the heart tissue. There's a bunch of different pathways from there. If the virus is cleared from the body, then the damage that was caused can lead to something called chronic viral cardiomyopathy. But that's not what we're talking about, because so far what we've been seeing in hospitals is patients with acute cardiomyopathy. So what ends up happening is the body, the heart tissue, and the immune system that's responsible for protecting the heart, basically the heart tissue becomes inflamed, and the inflammation response damages the tissue even further. And what ends up happening is the heart tissue weakens and then becomes really, really inefficient at pumping blood through the body. This has been extremely tragic in Seattle. There have been case reports out of Seattle where patients seem to be recovering. They're off the ventilator. They're just on supplemental oxygen. They're talking to their family. They seem to be doing okay. But then within 24 hours, suddenly they got cardiomyopathy, and the cardiomyopathy leads to multiple organ failure and then eventually cardiac arrest. And it's been very, very sad to see that. That's tough on families. As it was on mine. That really sucked because my father died in 2017 of acute viral cardiomyopathy. And yeah, it was a sad way to go. And that is one of the things that this virus is doing. Any thoughts or questions on that? Also, I'm just curious, what's our viewers on? Just 3. All right. Hmm. We need to somehow. How? I'm just trying to think. Like, how can I get this out there a little more? Post it in the coronavirus Discord server. Ooh, that's great. I didn't know there was a Discord server. That'd be great. Yeah, link that here. Actually, that'd be awesome. Yeah, there's some really big Discord servers out there. That's for sure. Let's see. I want to jump in on that. Let's see. So a 300,000 plus server. That's crazy. All right, let me pause for a second. Obviously, stream's still running, but I'm gonna write a little quick write up on what we're trying to do. All right. We'll see if anyone stops by. Yeah, did they actually have conspiracy theory channels? That's kind of crazy. Theories, conspiracies. Oh God. Anyhow, all right. So we'll see if some more people stop by. It'll be cool if people do it, and if not, that's fine too. All right. Let me thumb back to my other tab. All right, good. Cool. So the two methods that it seems to be killing people are viral pneumonia leading to bacterial pneumonia leading to septic shock and then death. And the other path seems to be acute viral cardiomyopathy. So yeah, seemingly. Okay, moving on. Death rates. So this has been, I think, like, it's interesting for people to see what people have been saying about the case rates and death rates for COVID-19. I think a lot of what I see a lot from especially young people is, oh well, it only affects the elderly, so I'll be fine. And yes, that's true in some senses. The fatality rate is quite low for young people, but that's not to say there haven't been deaths in young people aged 10 to 30. There definitely have been, and also there are quite a few cases of severe illness in people aged 10 to 30 as well, or even if we're going to older age ranges. Um, so the real problem, I think, is less the death rate and more just how quickly this virus reproduces and how what was I trying to say? What the reproductive rate is, and then how that reproductive rate causes the hospitals to become overwhelmed. And so we'll talk about that in a slide or two. I have one more demographic slide in here, which is case fatality rates, at least out of China. This is really interesting data here. And granted, you always have to keep in mind that people with these conditions are likely to be older. So if you happen to be young and you have hypertension, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in extra trouble. But it is interesting to see that people without health conditions, even elderly people, relatively old people without health conditions, were not super not very vulnerable to this. Strixers, doesn't it also have lifelong or long-lasting damage on the lungs no matter the age? I know pneumonia can have that effect. I don't know how much we know yet about COVID-19 specifically. So yes, pneumonia can lead to chronic decreased lung function, and can increase people's susceptibility to lung infections in the future. But beyond that, I don't think we can really say on this one. One interesting connection between cardiovascular disease, diabetes, respiratory disease, and hypertension is the use of ACE inhibitors. So one thing I've been talking about lately is there's a proposed mechanism for which, or I guess through which, it seems to be, at least it's possible. Again, this is a hypothesis. Take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. It's a hypothesis here, but it's definitely plausible that one of the things linking cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and hypertension in particular together is that all three of these conditions are treated with ACE inhibitors, such as enalapril, and other types of drugs. And what these drugs do is they wait, hang on, let me find that slide, because I know I put it in here. Okay, I put it in at kind of towards the end, but now I should have put it earlier, because this is really, like, this is basically what is suggested is happening. So ACE inhibitors inhibit the ACE2 receptor, which basically makes it so that the receptor is less receptive to the ligands that bind to it. So in the case of the ACE2 receptor, that's angiotensin, right? The ACE2 receptor converts angiotensin into angiotensin 1,7, I think. I don't remember quite, but it's something along those lines. But what ACE inhibitors do is they go in and they deactivate that receptor. Once that receptor is deactivated, the cell isn't stupid, right? It can tell, wait a second, right? I'm not like, my proteins aren't being used as much, but I know I need to be doing this job, right? Like I know I need to be converting angiotensin into angiotensin 1,7. It has like that kind of, it has that in its head. So then what the cell does is it says, okay, well, clearly I need to make more of these. I need to make more of these ACE2 receptors. And we know that this happens in heart tissue. This much we definitely know for sure, is that in heart tissue, ACE2 receptors upregulate, or sorry, ACE inhibitors upregulate the amount of ACE2 receptor production. If this is happening in lung tissue as well, or if this upregulation is what's responsible for the virus being especially able to target the heart and cause cardiomyopathy, then that is a really plausible way that that would link, or a plausible mechanism that would connect, I guess, would connect hypertension, diabetes, and chronic heart disease. It's because all those conditions are treated with ACE inhibitors. Granted, I guess one thing you do have to keep in mind is people with these conditions are they're going to be in worse health anyways. So how can you differentiate between the effect of the drug and the overall lower health and worsened immune systems of these people that are taking ACE inhibitors? That I don't think we really know for sure. And so it's possible that the drug isn't involved at all, or it's possible that the drug is really important in this mechanism, but it's pretty likely that it's a mix of the two. Is the upregulation due to the medications for this disorders? Yes, it is. The ACE inhibitors, basically what, like I said, the inhibitors are basically deactivating this receptor. That's their job. So then the cell says, wait a second, I need to produce more of these receptors. So they produce more ACE2 receptors. And as we looked earlier, as we saw earlier, the ACE2 receptor is what SARS-CoV-2 uses to gain access to the cell. So like, it makes sense. It's like the cells are producing more doors. Um, and like more ACE2 receptors means more avenues that SARS-CoV-2 can use to enter the cell, thereby maybe making it easier for the virus to attack heart cells or attack lung cells. Um, is untreated hypertension less of an issue than treated hypertension? Hypertension can be deadly, so that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm not a medical professional, so don't. I don't. I can't really. I can't really answer that question other than to say that like people depend on drugs like enalapril and other ACE inhibitors. Um, and if they didn't get them, they die. so so it's very very important for hypertension to be treated. Um, Having said that, there are other types of treatment, other drugs used to treat hypertension. One of which is a class of drugs called beta blockers. Um, Beta blockers and ACE inhibitors work in quite different ways. Again, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a pharmacologist. I don't know all the nuances to when you might want to prescribe an ACE inhibitor versus when you might want to prescribe a beta blocker. But in theory, there might be some patients that would be able to switch their medication to beta blockers. Having said that, this sort of upregulation often has, a lingering effect. Um, Hard to say how long, but if you just went off the drug cold turkey, one, that would be incredibly dangerous, and you could be at risk of death from acute hypertension. Like that could kill you if you just suddenly went off your hypertension medication. So don't ever do that. But it could also cause you to. What was I going to say? But I guess it's not guaranteed that ACE2 expression would go back to normal. At least not quickly. I don't know the timeline on that, but I do know that these proteins stick around for a while, and the epigenetic changes necessary to cause the protein to be expressed more also tend to stick around for a while. It doesn't just switch immediately. That's a really good question, though. Anyhow, where was I? I think we were here. Here? Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting, like, possible link between some of these things. Again, everything I just said is a hypothesis. Take that with a grain of salt, but it's an interesting one, and at least it has some legs, I think. There's some logic behind that hypothesis. What else was I going to say? Yeah. Anyhow, so this is like, I think, the problem with this virus is just like the reproductive rate is so freaking high. It's incredibly contagious. It's not as contagious as something like measles, which I think measles is fully airborne. I could be wrong on that. I don't remember measles transmission, but measles is like 5 times as infective as coronavirus is. But it's quite infective, much more infective than seasonal flu. And the problem is just how badly it's been overwhelming the health systems. Thank you for what was that? A follow, probably? Yeah, thanks for the follow. The biggest problem, I think, is just how many cases are generated and how quickly they overwhelm health systems. And also, man, that audio is way too loud. I think, at least for now, I think I'm just going to turn off desktop audio because I can't deal with that. That sound is super distracting. So what was I going to say? Man, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so lots of cases generated, and roughly, I've seen numbers anywhere from between low estimates of like, it's still happening. Hang on a second. I've seen, there we go. Oh man, but no, I need to be able to hear myself through the, this is gonna, hang on. I need to figure out, why are those follower notifications? Oh, okay, whatever. I'm just gonna go silent on my end, so I can't hear the notifications. Yeah. All right. Getting back to this. So the biggest problem, I think, is just how many cases are generated and how many of those cases result in hospitalizations. Um, Low estimates I've seen for the percent of cases that result in hospitalizations are around 5%, and high estimates I've seen are as high as like 15 or 16%. Um, I think probably the reality is somewhere between 5 and 10%. I suspect there's a lot of undetected cases out there, between asymptomatic cases, cases that are um, very low symptoms, and people just don't go into the hospital to get tested, and so on and so forth. There's probably a good number of those cases that are just not being detected. Um, Assuming that's the case, and assuming the uh, the percentage of cases that end up in hospitalizations is around 10%, then we can do some basic math to ask what would it look like if, as many epidemiologists have predicted, the total number of cases or total percent of the American population that's infected is between like 40 and 70%. I think that's the latest prediction that I've seen. If that's true, if it's between 40 and 70%, let's pick 50% to keep things simple. So 50% of 330 million is 165 million. That's half of the United States population would get it in our simulation. And if half the population gets it and 10% of those people end up hospitalized, that's 17 million roughly, 17 million additional hospitalizations, which like that is a lot. That's a lot of hospitalizations. Um, so like it's that's definitely more than the United States health system can handle. Not without leading to really sad triage situations like we've been seeing in Italy. Um, so that's disturbing. I think just thinking about like what would it look like in order for 50% of the population to gain immunity through getting infected. And the actuality of that is we would see relatively high rates of death. Um, so relatively high fatality rates. So I'm going to skip forward, realizing that these slides might not be in the best order. But take a look at these two graphs. I think this really tells an interesting story. Now, granted, I would completely ignore the Iran line because I don't really think we can trust Iranian figures. Um, this does not seem plausible to me. They've been claiming that they've had barely any new cases when I just feel like it's hard to believe. Um, so I would recommend just totally ignore the Iran line. But the Hubei and Italy lines, those are more believable. Um, and so if you take a look at the world overall, and China that doesn't include Hubei, the case fatality rate is probably a bit lower than 1%. And that's probably a good sign. I mean, granted, 1%, even 1% or a little less than 1% is quite high for a disease like this. That is not. Iran said, "Whoop, yeah." So the case fatality rate is, even 1% is disturbing because that's a lot of people. But it's not not as bad as it could be when you consider that most of those 1% are folks that have some pre-existing conditions that make them especially susceptible, and are probably relatively elderly. So at least in that sense, it's not the worst. But what's scary is what's happening in Hubei and Italy, because in these areas, the main difference between Italy and Hubei and the rest of the world is that in these places the outbreaks got out of control, and there weren't there were not adequate, um, uh, I guess, epidemic control measures being taken in those areas. And what ends up happening is you end up with extremely overcrowded hospitals that are operating at 200% capacity in Italy, where doctors are routinely having to make decisions of, we only have 30 respirators and we have 20 people in the waiting room. We've got 10 people in the waiting room are very ill and need respirators. Like, who do we give our next respirator to? Like, these are the questions that doctors in Italy are having to answer. Um, and those are very difficult questions. And what ends up happening is they have to prioritize young patients that have a lot of years left to live and have a higher probability of surviving, but happen to be getting severe symptoms from this, they prioritize those patients, and then the patients that don't get access to care often end up passing, even though they might have survived if there was if there was enough medical, there were enough hospital beds or there were enough respirators. So that's pretty sobering, I think, because the reason why the rest of China, and the reason why South Korea have managed to contain their outbreaks is because of very dramatic um, social distancing policies. China shut down school for 300 million students for 2 months. That's crazy. And China did not have the capacity like South Korea and Japan did to completely switch all those students over to remote learning, and even Japan struggling with that. But so that's pretty scary that they had to do that kind of extreme measure in order to keep this down. And Italy and Hubei, which didn't have the time to do that didn't react in time, they've seen some very disturbing case fatality rates. So that's I think the critical issue is you can have the best medical care in the world, and it just doesn't matter if you don't have enough hospital beds for the people that need them. Um, that's the problem. So Frigid says, "Man, supply trains are so messed up. Our lack of wide-scale testing ability reminds me so much of the IV bag shortage when Puerto Rico got hit by Hurricane Maria back in 2018." Yep. And if that's something that disturbs you, I would highly recommend reading basically everything that Dr. Osterholm writes. He's like a leading expert on SARS and MERS and epidemics generally. He's worked with all sorts of different governments on their pandemic responses and just disease control in general. So highly recommend him. He did a great interview on Joe Rogan's podcast, which let me go ahead and actually link that. I'm not typically a Joe Rogan watcher, but I think like this particular podcast was awesome, and you should watch it. All the whole thing. Watch the whole thing. The first 15 minutes are the important part, but after this, definitely watch that interview. It's fantastic. So anyhow, yeah. So how contagious is this disease? If you compare it to measles, not very contagious, but I mean there are some pretty bad diseases in here that it's comparable to. Um, so yeah, I don't know. These slides are probably a little bit out of order, and I also didn't rehearse this at all. Anyhow, I guess one other thing I wanted to discuss. I don't know. Let's see. Did I talk? No, I haven't talked about this. So the other thing I wanted to discuss is the difference between R0 and R effective. So R0 is, and this is kind of getting into evolutionary biology and ecology. But R0 is the base reproductive rate. So this is the reproductive rate of like how many cases does this generate if you have a population where no one is immune and you are, how should I say this? How many cases does it generate if no one is immune and yeah, that's just the best way to phrase it. When no one's as immune and there's no one's taken any measures to prevent the infection from spreading. So there's no disease control measures in place. And, if that's the case, then a disease like measles spreads through the population like wildfire, which is why it's so important to get your freaking measles vaccine, because measles is so contagious. So, a lot of people are, I think, downplay this because the flu, yeah, I mean, yes, it has a reproduction number above 0, right? Oh, by the way, I don't think I actually explained what it means. The reproductive number is the number of cases generated per case. So, on average, every COVID-19 case creates 2.8 additional cases. Whereas on average, measles produce 15 cases from each case in a completely naive population, in a population with no immune response, no immunity at all. That's what that number means. So like keep that in context. But like 2.8 is still really high. Like if you do the math on this, 2.8 means like the doubling time of COVID-19 becomes very, very quick just because the number of people every person infects is quite high. And note that this is an average. You could have someone that doesn't infect anyone else on one hand, and then on the other hand, you could have someone that infects friggin' 40 people, like the guy in Westchester did. There's one guy who was sick for a week in Westchester and ended up infecting like 40 people on what's that train called? Can't remember. North something. I can't remember. I live in New York. I should know this. But yeah. What was I saying? Anyhow, yeah. So that's the R0. But more important and also much harder to calculate is or maybe easier to calculate. I actually don't know. Is the R effective. And the R effective is the effective rate of transmission. So I mean, what ends up happening is, let's suppose you have 10 people in a room, right? And one of them has, let's say, COVID-19. And I mean, granted, 10 people in a room, yeah, everyone would get sick quickly because it's a enclosed room. But let's suppose in this imaginary room, people get sick at the same rate as like an average person would get people walking around them sick. So it's not like just an infection, cubicle. Well, let's say that person infects 3 people, which is pretty close to the average of 2.8 people that person would infect. Well, now those 3 people, when they spread the infection, if they spread it back to that original person's not going to get it. So their R0 is still 2.8. That's the base reproductive rate, but the effective rate of reproduction is a bit less than 2.8. Because people they spread it to might have already caught it or might have already developed immunity. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm not sure if I explained that correctly. But basically, R effective is the effective rate of reproduction as an outbreak occurs, and inexorably, in any outbreak like this, the effective reproductive rate will decline. Unless something about the environment changes. So, for example, if you had a flu, let's say you had a flu outbreak in the summer, for instance, and it was going pretty slowly. But then the weather got really cold in the fall and the winter. Well, the temperature can actually increase the base reproductive rate. So for influenza, and so in that case, maybe in the summer the R0 of influenza could dip below 1. It could be like 0.8 or 0.9. But then if the weather warms up again, or if the weather gets cold again, the base reproductive rate of influenza increases, and that's why you have seasonal outbreaks of influenza in the winters, because cold temperatures and dry conditions are good for influenza transmission, at least from the virus's perspective. So Strixer says, I thought I heard on the news that there are cases of some people who had coronavirus but then got it again later. What's the validity of that? It's definitely true, but it's also complicated. It's complicated for a number of reasons. One is our tests are not perfect. There have been a lot of false negatives, especially early on in testing of this disease. So in China, there were people that were horribly ill for over a week, and they were tested 2 or 3 times, and every time the test comes up negative. But then they get tested a 3rd time or a 4th time, and then suddenly the test is positive. Now, what's more likely, that they just suddenly got the virus, or that they already had it and the test failed? Well, probably that they already had it and the test failed. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, right? So if they have bilateral pneumonia and they've got the hacking cough and the fever and like leukopenia and all that kind of stuff, if they have all those symptoms, and even if their test results are negative, then well, you could still assume they have it. But what's worrisome is like, okay, if your test is giving a lot of false negatives, then what happens if someone tests negative after they've seemingly recovered? It's possible they still have it. It's possible they've cleared it. We don't really know. We have found viral particles in people's secretions, let's say, 37 days after the onset of symptoms. So, it clearly seems like this virus can stick around for a while in people. The question is it contagious at those levels? You need more than 1 or 2 viruses in order to get someone infected, usually. Obviously there's the once in a million or 1 in a million chance that if one virus lands in your nose, you're going to get the infection. But usually, if you're inhaling a reproductive droplet from someone that has COVID-19, you're inhaling not one, not two, but thousands of viral particles, and that is enough to really get the infection going. Um, so, and conversely, you need significant numbers of viral particles to spread the disease. So, anyhow, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to know whether the problem is the tests are bad, which is possible, or whether it's the virus is hiding. That's also possible, right? If the virus is hiding in some reservoir in your body, maybe your heart tissue, right? Maybe your liver, somewhere else, right? Then a nose swab isn't going to detect the virus. And it's not that it's gone, it's still there, it's just in a different reservoir. That's possible. And then the other possibility is that, yeah, that person did get reinfected. Um, and if that's the case, see, again, this is super complicated. There's a lot going on here. If the person got reinfected, then the options are, okay, well, did they get reinfected because their bodies did they get reinfected because COVID-19 is generally difficult for our immune system to stop? Or did they get reinfected because they were immunocompromised in some way? Or did they get reinfected because it's a different strain? Or and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different possibilities. And so the summary that I saw from the website or the organization Up to Date, which basically provides synopses of everything you need to know for every single possible clinical diagnosis and how to treat these patients from a nurse's perspective and a physician's perspective, et cetera, et cetera. The summary that I saw from them basically said, the clinical implications of the fact that some people seem to test positive again weeks after they originally had it is unclear. We really don't know. It's hard to say for sure. Perhaps out of an abundance of caution, if you get the virus and you clear the virus from your system, you might not want to see grandma for a month or two afterwards, just to make sure. That's I don't know if I answered that fully, but that's my understanding of it. Any thoughts or feedback or follow-ups on that? Okay. Cool. Anyhow, moving on. So, this is more getting into like, how much capacity does our healthcare system have to handle additional patients? So, critical access hospitals in this case are hospitals located kind of in rural areas. They tend to be quite small and have relatively limited facilities, but are there to serve rural populations. So their occupancy rate is pretty low. That's good. So on the left-hand side, you want the occupancy rate, I guess, from the perspective of handling a pandemic, you want the number on the left-hand side to be as low as possible. And you want the number on the right-hand side to be as high as possible. So, that's kind of what you want. You want a huge surplus of beds so you can handle people coming in that are sick. What was I going to say? In general, though, urban hospitals have a higher average acute occupancy rate. So overall, urban hospitals are operating 50, 60, 70, 80% capacity most of the time, and have far fewer excess beds. So if you look at the percentage of total beds available in urban hospitals, it's something like 18, 20%, which isn't really a good sign, because what that basically means is if there's a sudden influx of cases, urban hospitals are going to get really hit hard, and are probably going to run out of space relatively quickly. So that's kind of scary. And yeah, I guess that's just supporting what I was saying earlier about, yeah, the big problem with this is hospitals get overwhelmed, and if people aren't, even if you have great medical care, if people don't have access to that care because it's tied up with existing patients, then you have trouble. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just threw this together in like 30 minutes, so it's possible there's some slides that aren't super interesting, but I do kind of, this I find is interesting to see, just like the how to say it, like, hmm. This is the daily share of new confirmed cases by region. So you can kind of see at the beginning, Hubei was getting hit extremely hard, but you know, roughly the beginning couple weeks of February, they started really clamping down and shutting the cities down, and that helped drive the percent of new cases down as a result. And other regions of the world started having their epidemics as well. It looks like South Korea's cases are largely going down. Oh, by the way, this is as of March like 4th, so this is a bit dated. I didn't notice that, but yeah, actually. But anyhow, oh, I'm getting tired. Yeah, I don't like that slide too much. I shouldn't have put it in, I don't think. And yeah, like this is what I've been paying attention to the most lately is what's happening in Italy. Because yeah, Italy is I think a canary in the coal mine for what's going to happen in the U.S. Italy's healthcare facilities are better than ours. They have 15% more vacant hospital beds than we do. And they have, what was I going to say, lower rates of obesity and hypertension than we do. So, yeah, like whatever's happening in Italy, unless we take serious action soon, and it looks like we have been taking some serious action. So, you know, that's hopeful at least. Some people are taking this very seriously. Unless we do, we're going to end up like Italy, and that's scary. Because Italy had 250 case fatalities today. So I guess like where I'm at this point is just thinking like trying to game this out and trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And just trying to think like how will we end up responding to this? Because I think like give it another week or two, and we're going to end up seeing the same kinds of outbreaks that Milan is seeing in Italy, probably somewhere, unless we're lucky and we've reacted fast enough. But it's hard to tell with the lack of case of testing in the United States. It's really hard to tell like how many cases are there actually here, whereas Italy seems to be testing a lot more people. So I think what's going to end up happening is we're going to start hearing reports from hospitals that they're getting overwhelmed with patients, and you know once that happens, it's going to end up really like hitting the news, and people are going to really start getting scared. I think it's a tough one because on the one hand, it's good that people are being apprehensive about this. It's good to be to be scared, I think. But on the other hand, the what am I trying to say? On the other hand, I think that people are often reacting in the wrong way when they should be just trying to do everything in their power to stay home. They're more just saying, "Oh, I'm going to buy, toilet paper and hand sanitizer and make sure I clean really well," when there's really not a lot of evidence that hand washing is actually going to do a lot for this particular virus. Um, that's admittedly, I think, one of the more controversial things I believe at this point. But I think I agree with Dr. Osterholm when he was basically saying the primary cells that COVID-19 binds to are in the lungs, and deep in the nose. And so if you're just touching your nose or touching your eyes, it's unlikely that that ends up leading to transmission, relative to just being next to someone that has it. So I think like the real emphasis should be, I mean, washing your hands is still a great thing. You should do it. I don't think anyone's trying to suggest otherwise. But I really do think that the emphasis should be on social distancing. Just stay away from people that are sick, and regardless of whether you think you're sick or not, just stay away from other people. Because the problem is when it gets to a point where the hospitals are getting overwhelmed, if you get sick, if you are young, the hospital's going to prioritize you. But that's not exactly a good thing for the people the hospital is not prioritized. And a significant percentage of young people end up needing hospitalization. So it's not 10% like it is with older people, or even 20% with older people, but it's enough that it's scary. Um, yeah, I guess that's what I kind of had, isn't it? Oh, why is it so small? So yeah, I don't know. I just banged this out in like 30 minutes. Long term, what we're gonna try to do on the stream, for those of you that are still here, is our goal is to basically use this um, as a way to help students that are out of school and don't have access to a in-person classroom. Um, because as an educator, that's my background. Is I have a master's in teaching and a bachelor's in biology. As an educator, I know that like it's working remotely is just not as good as working in person, and it's a lot harder to have the kind of back and forth that you might have in person. And honestly, like the thing I love Twitch about most is that Twitch has a really, really interactive kind of style. So um, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to spread the word about this, and I'm hoping other people can spread the word that like starting hopefully Monday, I'm not sure exactly when, but starting Monday, the plan is to start doing pretty much every day, do a biology stream, basically answering questions for people, loosely themed on a topic area, like maybe theming things on genetics or theming things on ecology or evolution or what have you. But trying to help students understand topics that they don't get. I think we're going to try to stay away from COVID-19 in the future overall, but we might do some more deep dives into specific areas. Um, if anyone in here has thoughts or feelings on what they would like to see out of a channel like this, I'm all ears. I'd love to hear them because this is a really new concept. I don't know if anyone's really tried to do this on a big scale, but I think this is the right moment for it. Well, thank you, Strixers. I do have a lot of streaming experience, but on a different channel and for Magic the Gathering. But I've been out of that for a long time. I might go back to it eventually when all this dies down, but I'm more interested in. Oh yeah, here we go. I hope that this would be kind of similar to Office Hours. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, Strixers. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Is basically like Office Hours, but trying to be a little bit more how to say it, like Office Hours, but also trying to theme things a little bit and do some actual instruction as well. So just for a taste for what we can do. Um, oh, you're saying you hope your school can do what I'm doing because it's great. But this is an example. So like I've been working on updating my teaching PowerPoints for Twitch. So I had to move a whole bunch of things to the left so that the camera and the chat box could fit. But I worked pretty hard on these for a different reason. But I'm hoping I can use these here as well. I guess here's some other questions I have for everyone. And again, if you're not interested in this side of things, feel free to head out. But some other questions I have for people are like, what do you think would make an educational stream interesting for people? Like, what would get people coming in? Because I don't think I've really seen something like this out there, and I don't know if anyone's tried, but certainly no one seems to have succeeded in a big way. So this is really like a fresh concept, or at least a bold concept. And I have ideas on some things I want to try, but nothing like I don't know how to get this off the ground from the start. Other than trying to spread the word on Discord and through social networks and things. Because that in and of itself is quite challenging. Developing a study type game or something to try out, try to make it more interesting. Yeah, actually, one thing I was thinking about is like one thing to keep it interesting would be periodically asking questions and then using basically similar to buzzer systems in high schools or colleges, basically having people vote on what they think the right answer is. I have some ideas for how Socratic seminars could even happen. Cool, fun demonstrations are great. Having good instruction, interesting topics can bring people as well. Sure. I think the challenge is keeping things interesting, but also pretty close to what schools do, because the idea is not for this to replace instruction, but to supplement it. To grow your stream, you could reach out to other streamers and try to network. Yeah, I do have a bit of a network. What's Cahoots? I don't know what Cahoots is. Learning games. Interesting. What is this? I've not seen this. Group learning, e-learning, distance learning. Oh. Interesting. Live game. Neat. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. I should check that out. Twitch may have built-in polls. Yeah, I do have some polls, some poll commands. So maybe they're not enabled right now. Oops. But I know Streamlabs, the bot that I've got can do that. So anyways, I think I'm going to start heading out unless anyone else has anything to say. This is more of a dry run than anything else. Next time, we'll probably try to keep it to closer to school topics. Is there a command thing where viewers can click on an area and have it show up on the stream? Oh, you mean like Twitch plugins? Because that could definitely, yes, that is a thing. Yeah. Though I don't know, I'm not sure which plugin I'd have to use for that. I need to do some more research on that. But yeah, I don't know. If you like it, consider following, and otherwise, I think I'm gonna head out. So, good chatting. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, I was useful for you, and you learned something maybe. And stick around if you feel like this is good for you. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. See you later, everyone.